The morning teaching with Jesus Christ on Matthew 24. And right now we're going to do something a little different and something that you will not find done in many churches, and that is Bible contradictions. I mean, you do not walk into many churches and have somebody show you where the Bible contradicts itself. And it's interesting to be able to look for yourself and see, and then break from the stranglehold that you have had, which has kept you agreeing with what the preacher says or what the church says simply because they say it, instead of you honestly understanding, believing it. If you'll take a glaring look at the Bible and why it's interesting to look at contradictions, you'll finally arrive at the conclusion it can't be literal. You cannot take it literally. Okay. It's interesting to look. If you look at the four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you'll find that all of a sudden, you get to the book of John, it stands out by itself. There's something totally different about it. Even without looking in detail at it, you've sensed that. You've always known that when you got to the book of John, it just wasn't quite the same, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very closely aligned. But in Matthew, it's different than in John, where the teaching is different. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's the temple, it's the law, it's the messianic kingdom. And in John, it's not quite that way. But there's a strange manner of writing in the book of John, which I think you should take a look at. John was a Jew. John was a Jew, and his name was, not John, it was Oannes. O-A-N-N-E-S. That's you go from one end of this quote-unquote Holy Land to the other. You'll never find anybody by the name of John. You'll never find anybody by the name of Peter. You'll never find anybody by the name of Mary. You'll never find anybody by the name of Paul. You'll never find any of those names. All of those things are structured to make you more comfortable with this stuff. His name was Oannes, which means fish. Fish. Which in turn means Christ consciousness. Okay? John, and we'll go along with that name, set himself aside for some reason. The author of the book of John characterizes the Jews strangely. If you look in page 98 of the New Testament, in the book of John, in John 8:57, page 98 in the New Testament, okay, that's in your little Bibles, John chapter 8 and verse 57, there's something a little bit strange. And that is, it says, then said the Jews unto him, you are not 50 years, you have not seen Abraham. Yet here, this guy, John, was a Jew, and yet he talks as if the Jews were separate from him. That, you know, not we or us or our group. I mean, he sets himself aside from the Jews. In John 9:18, he says the Jews didn't believe. In John 10:19, he says there's division among the Jews. So it's very strange. Who did write the book of John? You know, and he talks, and whoever it is talks so strangely. But now there's another clue that we should look at to say maybe there's something strange here. It is known historically that this John was born at Bethsaida. B-E-T-H-S-A-I-D-A, Bethsaida. Okay? But now let's look at something. Let's look at John on page 102 in the New Testament, the book of John, John chapter 12. All right? John chapter 12, verse 21. Now this is John, who was born at Bethsaida, writing here in John chapter 12 and verse 21. Okay? The same came therefore to Philip, which was of Bethsaida of Galilee. Bethsaida of Galilee. John was born in Bethsaida. There never was a Bethsaida in Galilee. Never. Now, I mean, wouldn't you think a guy who was born there would know that that town did not exist in that province? He didn't. So who really was? If John, who was born at Bethsaida, wrote, would he have the town? That was like you was saying, I was born in Forked River, Oklahoma. There is none. And it leaves you to wonder then the authority of this book and who wrote it. Who put that in there? You know, why was it put in there? And a very strange thing we start to see in the book of John. The author brings in the secret doctrines of the ancient mysteries, the Zoroastrian mysteries. You know, that generally you don't find other people. In John 6:46, he says, he which is of God, he has seen the Father. Think about what it just said. He which is of God, he has seen the Father. If I was to ask you how many of you have seen the Father, I think there's enough of you in this room that know what that means to say yes. Because you don't look with your two eyes, you look with your single eye. Yes, I have seen the Father. Yes, I have seen God. So there's not a contradiction there, even though it says no one has ever seen God. And in John 6:63 it says, it is the Spirit which quickens. The flesh of the lower mind profits nothing. The words I speak, they are spirit. And that's Zoroastrianism. That's a strange way that John approaches spirituality as opposed to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who didn't touch any of that stuff. There's another way that this fellow John, who wrote this Bible, talks that's interesting. You don't have to look at it, but it says in John 19:26, Jesus says his mother standing by the disciple whom he loved. Isn't that strange? Here, in other words, if I was John, and I would write this, and I wouldn't say his mother was standing next to me. He was standing next to the disciple whom he loved, which would be John. So who is he talking about? And in John 20, verse 2, it says, Peter said to the other disciple whom Jesus loved. And that disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, strange way for a person to write about himself. Let's take a look at something interesting. Go to page 165, and let me see if you find anything that you may be able to say, hey, that's not right. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, page 165. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 5. Okay? And look what it says. We're talking about Jesus who rose from the dead, okay? And that verse 4 says he was buried and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. Verse 5, that he was seen of Cephas. Now Cephas is Peter. Okay? He was seen of Cephas, then of the 12. Anybody see anything? There was only 11. See, he didn't know that Judas had died. The guy committed suicide. There was no 12, there was only 11. Okay? So if then indeed that is a mistake, what else may be a mistake? Because when a human being puts a pen down to a pencil, a paper, anything is possible. Then you really know that you have to seek the word that comes from within you so that you can interpret and override and spiritually understand these things. What is holy? What is true? Because if you take this stuff literally, you're going to get yourself into a lot of confusion. You ready to go? Now let's look at some contradictions. Let's go to the very first book in the Bible, which is the book of Genesis. On page 12, you get to Genesis 17. Okay? Page 12, you come to Genesis 17. Now this is a mandate. Genesis 17 and verse 10. And those of you who are out in homeland, wherever you may be, what you should do is look it up, stop the tape, look it up, and so that you see these things. Because if you're going to sit here and say, well, that's what he said, that's one thing, but I want you to look for yourself. Genesis 17, verse 10. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Now this is God talking. This is my covenant, God is saying, that you will keep between you and me and everybody that comes after you. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. And that's pretty clear. So this is God's instructions, and he's not just saying, now look, Moses, you and these. He's saying, everybody, this is a covenant that you will keep, and every one of the seed that comes after you, every man shall be circumcised. All right, that's good. Now let's go on, and let's go to page 177 in the New Testament. The rest of you go to the book of Galatians. Okay? Now, did you just have that law written and burned into you from the Word of God? God stood on the holy mountain and shouted down, this is my covenant between me and your seed that comes after you. Every man child that is born shall be circumcised. Did God say that? Did you read it in the Holy Word? Did you kiss the Bible and appreciate that it came right out of the mouth of God? Hallelujah, brother. Amen, brother. Now read Galatians chapter 5, verse 2. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you, that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. Uh-oh. Now what do we do? Well, what do you do? Who was right? Was Paul right or was God right? Because God said the first one. It's the Holy Bible. In court, we kiss it. We put our hand on it. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. How do we resolve something as obvious as that? Very simply. The male represents the mind. The mind must be circumcised. The outer desire of the mind must be cut away so that you can tune into God. But if you go chop chop on the physical part, you're wasting your time. That isn't going to get you nowhere but sore. I mean, tell it like it is. So you must be circumcised, not of the flesh, but of the heart. You must cut away the outer desire for those things which the world promises, those things which religion promises. You must cut away from that. And indeed, instead, you must listen that which the single ear. But you know, there's a very interesting thing. Can you find the book of Jeremiah? If you can, I want to show you something. If you can find the book of Jeremiah, there's a very interesting thing in the book of. Well, all right, just a minute. Well, I have to find it myself because I wasn't. Okay, Jeremiah chapter 6. Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 10. And I want to read something to you which points out this circumcision. Okay? Jeremiah chapter 6, verse 10, folks. Page 627 in the Old Testament. 628. Thank you, Ethel. Okay. Now listen, this is what it says. To whom shall I speak and give warning that they may hear? Behold, their ear is uncircumcised, and they cannot hear. So now you go up and you tell all the rest of the people that think we're running a cult down here that we're going to cut off people's ears. We're going to circumcise ears next week. This is a spiritual thing. Cut away the stuff that you're listening to from preachers and teachers and evangelists and me and everybody else, and listen within, and you'll hear the truth. Yes, sir?
That would be an explanation of he who has ears, let him hear?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes. That's Brother Don. Okay. Okay, so there's one there. That's a contradiction, and I think we were able to resolve that. Let's look at Exodus 24, page 668. Just page 68, not 668. Exodus 24 in those little Bibles of yours, and we'll go to verses 9 and 11. Exodus 24, verse 9 and 11. And what does it say? Then went up Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders, and they saw the God of Israel, and there it was under his feet, as it were the body of heaven, and all, and so forth and so on. They saw the God of Israel. Look at verse 11. They saw God and did eat and drink. In other words, they sat down at a table, they had lasagna with God, and they had a great time. They got all together, and they ate, and they drank, and they saw God. That's what it says, see. Now, let's go to page 221 in the New Testament, in your little Bibles, and everybody else go to the book of 1 John, okay? 1 John, and we'll go to 1 John chapter 4 and verse 12. Now, it says in the Bible, these guys went up onto the mountain, they saw God, they sat down with God, they ate with God, they had a conversation with God, but in 1 John 4:12, this guy says what? No man has seen God at any time. No man has seen God at any time. Well, can you resolve it? Certainly you can resolve it. When you go up to the mountain, you ascend up into the mountain of consciousness. You ascend up into meditation, and you see God spiritually. But you'll never see God physically. That's why born-again Christians are waiting for Jesus Christ to come back, riding a white horse over Kennedy Airport, and going to set everybody free. And yet Jesus Christ says in Luke 17:20 what? The kingdom comes not with observation, because the kingdom of God is within you. Look at it. You know, that is the most stunning statement that everyone should see, so that you know which side that you're on. Look at page 77 in the New Testament, Luke 17, and look at it again. You could look at this 1,000 times because you're looking at the very basis of which Christianity stands on. Their church, their foundation, their whole thing is waiting for the second coming of Jesus Christ, the physical, literal second coming, so that he can live and reign forever and ever and ever. But he blows the thing up with a bubble here in Luke 17:20 when Jesus Christ says, the kingdom of God comes not with observation. You cannot see it. And in verse 21, he says, neither they're going to say it's here, it's there, it's coming that, the bop, 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 for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. I mean, it should be clear, and we should follow that. We should believe that. We should trust that. And when we do, we'll learn of that which is the exciting news that we have indeed the kingdom of God and everything that is necessary for salvation and restoration in life within us. Now let's take a look here. In page 299, your Old Testament, we're going to change things a little bit. 1 Kings, okay? It's the book of 1 Kings, and it's 299 in the Old Testament. 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 12. And what does it say at 1 Kings chapter 8 and verse 12? Then spoke Solomon, the Lord said that he would dwell where? In thick darkness. Darkness. Now that's very interesting because that picks up where Amos talked about. Remember when we were talking about the melatonin, the secretion of that hormone melatonin? Because the pineal gland of the brain, which stimulates the flow of melatonin, which Dr. Wilson from the laboratory said kills cancer cells, that pineal gland shuts down when it's exposed to bright light. The melatonin will not flow. When you are in meditation and when you are then deep in darkness, then you can activate the pineal gland, the melatonin will flow. Okay? So God does indeed dwell in darkness. Remember we looked at the book of Amos, and Amos said in Amos 8:5, what is the day of the Lord to you? The day of the Lord is darkness and not light. So there it is. God dwells in deep darkness. Now go into the New Testament to page 195. We've got a lot of Bible jumping tonight, but it's interesting for you to see. The rest of you go to the book of Timothy, 1 Timothy, okay? And 1 Timothy chapter 6. It's page 195 in the New Testament in your Bible. Now here it says, God dwells in darkness. 1 Timothy chapter 6 says, dwelling in the light which no man can approach. The light, the blinding light, which no man can approach. Well, so what are we talking about? Is there a contradiction? No, there's not a contradiction. There's no contradiction at all, because only in the dwelling in the darkness, deep into the darkness, deep in the center of your mind, deep in the center of your consciousness, can there be an explosion of that light. Can there be an explosion of that which is God's way of communicating healing and light and understanding and wisdom to you. Okay? If your eye be single, your body will fill with light. That awakens the melatonin. Okay? Let's take a look at something good now. I didn't give what verse? 1 Timothy 6:16. I'm sorry. 1 Timothy 6:16 says God dwells in light, and 1 Kings 8:12 says God dwells in darkness, and the only way that you can get to the light which God dwells in is if you enter into the darkness of meditation. There's no other way to do it. Why wouldn't you do it? You have children. There's children sitting in the chairs here. Why don't you make those children meditate? Because you may save their lives. You can stop cancer cells that are microscopic things from ever afflicting them. You can strengthen their immune system. It has nothing to do with hocus pocus. It has nothing to do with religion. You can say, well, they don't understand. I don't give a darn if they don't understand. You'll go to a doctor and you'll spend $50,000 to get something cured. Why not do what the ancients say and prevent it from happening? What sense does it make? And all you got to do is sit on your rear end and shut up for 5 minutes. That's all you got to do. Nobody asks for anything. Doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to spend any money. You don't have to read any books. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to join anything. All you got to do is sit on the doggone floor and shut up. And it flows by itself, and cancer cells are destroyed, and the immune system is strengthened, and things start to go right. What the heck is a big deal? You know what it is? You're afraid of what they'll think of you. Oh, my mother heard I was meditating. Oh, my God. Make her meditate. You know, nobody wants to do it until the doctor says, uh-oh. Then they read, oh, Dr. Siegel. They buy all Bernie Siegel's books. Get all of his cassette tapes. Everybody's tuned into Branch. Oh, I'm going crazy. I got to. Why not get it done before that happens? It doesn't make any sense to me. And you know why they don't do it? Because them, the robed warriors, the fear peddlers, have told everybody, oh, you'll open your mind to devils if you meditate. So they don't. And so they deprive themselves of what Dr. Wilson said and Dr. Siegel said and all the scientists are saying. They deprive themselves of the simple act of allowing the pineal and the pituitary gland. You know what it said? Discovery Channel the other day. They're not looking at arthritis in the joints anymore because they're finding it comes from the brain, and that is a malfunction of the pituitary gland. Do you know what the whole thing of Krishna and Buddha and Zoroaster and Jesus is? Getting the pineal gland and the pituitary gland plugged in like a battery and turning you on, lighting you up like a bulb, making you light. Why not do it? Doesn't cost anything. Sit down and shut up and whoa and go, fly. That's all it takes. But those people up there, what? It's all right. I'm getting into this. This is exciting. Anything that's free and it works, it should be exciting to you. God. But look at this one. Get this. Let's go to Matthew, page 20 in your New Testament. Matthew 19. Matthew 19. Okay? Page 20 in the New Testament. Matthew 19. Let's go to verse 26. Okay? Look what it says here. With God, all things are possible. Isn't that great? It is great. Now let's go to page 211 in the Old Testament. And let's go to the book of Judges. Judges chapter 1. Page 211 in your Old Testament. Judges chapter 1. You ready for that? Now what did it say? Come on, get with this thing. I even lost the boot here. God, all things are possible. Okay? That's what it said. With God, all things are possible. Is that what it says? Is anybody here? Is that what it said, Joey? Yeah, he shakes his head too. Look what it says here. Judges chapter 1, verse 19. And the Lord was with Judah, and he drove out the inhabitants of the mountains, but he couldn't drive out the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. Oh, he can't do everything after all. You know, if they had wooden chariots, clear, he'd have done something. But the Lord got a little squeamish when he found out they had chariots of iron. And he's up there saying, oh, I'm a good God, but I ain't that good. I ain't messing with them. It's a contradiction, isn't it? The Lord can do everything, but he can't handle a bunch of iron chariots. Let me show you what that's all about. This is mysticism. Mysticism. A chariot is your mind. Mind. Iron is mental power. Okay? It's what it means mystically. You say, well, how does he know that's what it means? Because it says that in all of the books that they define what these things say, that's what it means. Gaskell says it. He knows. Everybody else says it. It means if you say, let's go shoot the bull, how do I know you're talking about a conversation? See, 2,000 years from now, I could be standing up saying, when they said shoot the bull, they didn't mean shoot the bull. They meant have a conversation. And there'll be people looking at each other. This guy's nuts. Where the heck did he come up with this stuff? But you don't really mean shoot the bull when you say, let's go shoot a bull, do you? Do you? No. Oh, that's great. That's great. Chariot means mind. Iron means mental power. What does it say? In the valley. Got it? In the valley, in your lower consciousness, okay, the power of your mind entertains those which are your thoughts, and God can do nothing to drive them out. That's your job. You've got to drive them out yourself. You see what I said? Look, let me show you when they built the temple. Well, I'm talking about thought. The temple. Here, take your finger. Point it over here. What is that? Come on.
Temple.
He was having trouble. I wanted to make sure he had a temple. Now, when they make the temple, I want to show you something. Go to that. You're going to have to find this. Somebody find it for them. 1 Kings chapter 6. 1 Kings chapter 6. I want you to see this with your own little eyes. 1 Kings chapter 6, page 296, and let's go to verse 7. Okay? 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 7. Now watch, when they're building the temple, watch this very carefully. And the house, when it was in building, when they were constructing the temple, was made of stone, that's natural, made ready before, that there was neither hammer nor axe nor any tool of iron heard in the house. You cannot build a temple by using your mental power. You cannot build the temple of God by using one thought. No tools of iron, no sound of any kind. That's why it's in there. And then, of course, as you go to 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 8, the door for the middle chamber, which is the holy room, was in the right side of the house. That's the right hemisphere of the brain. All right? Okay. Now, here's a good one. Let's go to John, page 93. We're almost halfway through. John, page 93, in your little Bibles. John chapter 5, verse 28. Okay? John chapter 5, verse 28. Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming in which all that are in the graves shall hear his voice and shall come forth. I was saying this morning, do you really want to be around for this? Do you really want to be walking up Lacey Road or wherever the cemetery is and Uncle Leroy starts parting the sand and coming out? I don't want to be. Hey, there's Uncle Leroy. It's the second coming. That's after Armageddon, when they've had a nuclear holocaust and, set everything up. Then all the graves are going to pop open, and Uncle Leroy and Charlie and Cousin Bertha, all these people are going to climb out. You want to get out of here. You don't want to be around for that. But this is what it says. They shall come forth out of the grave. Go to page 437 in the Old Testament. Look at the book of Job. Okay, that's right before the book of Psalms. The book of Job. And we'll look at Job chapter 7. Job chapter 7, it's on page 437 in your Old Testament. Job chapter 7, verse 9. And what does it say? As the cloud is consumed and vanish away, so he that goes down to the grave shall come up no more. What do you do with that? What's he talking about? There are, let me be the first to tell you this, folks, and this might come as a rude shock to you, and I hope it doesn't destroy your walk with the Lord. No dead body is getting out of any grave anywhere. Forget it. Once you hit the sand, it's all over. You then bring up the flowers. That's as far as you're ever going to bring up anything, okay? No dead bodies are going to... So what's it mean? When you hear his voice, you only can hear his voice in here, okay? And when you hear his voice, all of us who have been dead and buried in the muck and the fear and the guilt of this life will come out of that grave and rise up to be free and live with him forevermore. It's inner grave, an inner resurrection, an inner coming to life of all who have been destroyed and killed by the system. Okay? So there's no contradiction at all. I want you to solve this one for me, if you would, please. I want you to go to page 33 in the New Testament. Go to the book of Mark. Matthew, Mark. I want you to look at Mark chapter 1. Mark chapter 1. And let's go to verse 12. We don't usually do this much Bible hopping, but how can you do Bible contradictions without Bible hopping? You can't very well do it. Okay? Okay. It says here that immediately after his baptism, the Spirit drives him into the wilderness. And there he was in the wilderness for 40 days. That's Jesus. Was baptized and was immediately in the wilderness. Now, go to page 89 in your New Testament. Go to the book of John. And we'll go to John chapter 2. Okay? John chapter 2. And let's go to verse 1. Okay? And what it says there is that And the third day means the third day after his baptism. And the third day there was a marriage of the Cana of Galilee, and there he was. He was at the wedding. Jesus was at the wedding the third day after his baptism, but according to Mark, 3 days after the baptism, he was in the desert. How do you deal with it? It's very simple to deal with that. Because each one of you have to go into the wilderness before you can go to the wedding. That's all it means. There's no contradiction at all. Unless you're willing to enter into the wilderness of meditation, you'll never attend the divine wedding. There's nothing, or if you want to read this literally, go ahead and read it literally. One guy's got him going to the desert, the other guy's got him going to a wedding, and people are going to get, there's no problem with it at all, because Jesus entered into the wilderness, and that was the wilderness of meditation, into the wilderness of confusion, where he was trapped and tempted by his own mind, and then rose out of that up into this wedding, where he changed the water into wine, changed that which is truth into that which is spirit. Okay. Here, go to page 93. Well, you're in the book of John. Go to the book John 5. John 5. And go to chapter 31. Look what Jesus says. Are you ready for this one? If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. Okay? Did you see it? If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. Okay, you're in John. Go to John chapter 8. It's a couple of pages over. John chapter 8. Go to verse 14. Though I bear record of myself, my record is true. Doggone it. What do you do with it? Is it true or isn't it true? Do you believe him or don't you believe him? He is saying definitely here. That's right, believe it. But what he is saying is, if I bear witness of myself, if I bear record of my outer self, my carnal self, it's false. I am nothing. I am a human being. I am no different than you are. But if I bear record of myself, my divine inner self, my record is true. There is no contradiction at all. Okay? And Jesus said another time in Matthew 28:18, all power is given unto me in heaven and on earth. But then in John 5:30, what does he say? You're right there. You're in John 5. Take a look at it. You're only a couple of pages away. He said, all power is given unto me in heaven and on earth. John 5, verse 30. What does he say? I can of my own self do nothing. Do nothing. Do you know something? All power is given unto you in heaven and in earth. And it is located in the right hemisphere of your brain. It sits at the right hand of power. And when you begin your meditation experience and raise yourself up and stimulate that pineal gland, you open the right hemisphere of the brain. All power is given to you on heaven and on earth, inside of your mind. But do you know what? Of your own self, you can do nothing. Where's the contradiction? Do you see what I'm saying? Well, here's Jesus saying, resist not evil, turn the other cheek. And then in John 2:15, it says he made a scourge and drove the money changers out. You know, here he is, meek and mild. I'm a pacifist. Go ahead, you're going to hit me here, I'll turn the other cheek, hit me here. Everything in peace. Next thing, he's got this scourge in his hand, he's running through the place, and he's driving it. You're looking at it literally. How do you resist not evil? What do? You enter into absolute nothingness, and you take that which is the divine scourge of the Spirit, and you drive the money changers out of the temple. That means you drive those rotten thoughts out of your mind. Off they go. No contradiction at all. And the only way you can drive those thoughts is by resisting that evil, not coming against it yourself, but allowing that which is the divine power within you to come against it. Through meditation, through Om. This is the one I love. This is absolutely the one that I love the best. Take a look at this. Go to the book of Matthew. Page 5 in your little Bibles. Okay? Matthew chapter 5. Try to do it a little fast and we get rolling out of here. Matthew chapter 5, excuse me, and verse 44. But I say unto you, what? Love your enemies. Did you hear that, Al? Love your enemies. Rose, did you hear that? Love your enemies. Elliot, love your enemies. Need to do. Love your enemies. Let's jump over to page 21 in your New Testament, to the book of Matthew. in Matthew chapter 20. Okay? Matthew chapter 20. And I want you to go to verse 17. Okay? Matthew chapter 20. I got the wrong one. Maybe it's John 20. Hang on a minute. God, I hope I can't be there. Where is it? Anyhow, oh man, I messed this up. Where is it that where's Sue? Jesus says you got to hate your mother. You got to hate your mother, you got to hate your brother, you got to hate your father. You got to hate all of these people. Okay? I don't know what it says Mark 20 or where it is, and I messed that one up. Maybe it's Mark 20. Let me just look real quick and see if I can. Matthew 19, 29. All right, thank you, very good. And every one of you that has forsaken houses or brethren or sister or lands, that's true, but that's not the one I was looking for. I was looking for the one that Jesus said, there you must hate your mother and hate your father and all of this. You can find that for yourself. But the point is, here's one place Jesus is crying, is saying, love your enemies, and the next place is saying, hate your mother. And what is he saying then? How can you love your enemies? You can love your enemies when you hate your mother. The only way that you can love your enemies is by hating your mother. The only way you can hate your enemies is by, the only way you can love your enemies is by hating your mother. Do you understand that? And let me show you how you can love your enemies by hating your mother. Because the mother is mystically the seat of your emotions. The mother is mystically, that's from where your emotions come. That's where your emotional desires come. And when you cut them off, when you stop them, when you bring them to an end through your meditation, then you'll come into a position where you will embrace that which is the entire world. Do you know who's the enemies of Christianity? The Buddhists. The Krishna. Those people of the East. They're scared to death of them. These are Eastern religions. They couldn't wait for this war. They loved this war, you know, because it was given, oh, let's go over and we'll just do a number on these people. Bring our boys home. The hell with their boys, but bring our boys home. Go in and wipe that Gaddafi out. So you kill a couple of million kids. Who cares? Kill ahead. Why? Why would you do this? Because from deep within themselves, mother is declaring the war. Mother, which is that which is the emotional nature, is saying, yes, this is what your desires must be fulfilled. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Love your enemies, but you gotta hate your mother and hate your family, and that's that inner family. In Matthew 20, verse 17, Jesus told his disciples that he would die, and on the third day he shall rise again from the dead. Now go to the page 110, and it's John chapter 20. John chapter 20 and verse 9. I want you to see. This is Jesus had died. In Matthew, you have to look this up yourself, but I don't have time. Matthew 20, verse 17. Okay? Oh, for Pete's sakes, I was reading the wrong thing. Quick, Luke, page 75. Hurry up. Luke 14, page 75 in your little Bibles. Luke 14. All right? Luke 14 and verse 26. Okay? What's it say? Are you with me? Jesus has told you to love your enemies. I'm sorry, I messed that up. If any man come to me and not hate his father and his mother and his wife and his children and brethren and sisters and his own life, he cannot be my disciple. That is all mysticism. That's the one I was looking for, and I screwed it all up, okay? Because I had Matthew 20:17, which belongs here, where Jesus told his disciples that 3 days after he died, he would be raised from the grave. Now look at John 20, verse 9, page 110. This is after Jesus had died, okay? And look what it says about the disciples. John, chapter 20, verse 9. For as yet they knew not the Scripture that he must rise again from the dead. Jesus had instructed them that the third day he would rise again from the dead, and yet here they didn't know that. As we wrap this up, there's another interesting thing. Only in one gospel, which is the Gospel of John, is Lazarus mentioned as rising from the dead. That's the only place. That's a big deal. You know, if you get some guy that's been dead 4 days and get him to walk out of the tomb, that is a big deal. But only John mentions that. Look at it mystically. Look at it literally. Okay? I think one of the most interesting things of all was the transfiguration. That's where Jesus took Peter, James, and John. He said, come here with me. What's going to happen? Just don't ask any questions. Going up to the mountain. Okay, they get up there. guess what happens? God comes. Moses comes. Elijah comes. The whole mountain lights up with fire and light. Jesus is surrounded in light. Everybody, this is the most fantastic space experience anybody has had in the history of the world. John was there. You know what? The entire book of John never mentioned it. Never mentioned it. And all the other Gospels said he was there. It says that in Matthew 17:1, Mark 9:2, and Luke 9:28, that John was there. The only thing is they didn't tell him. He didn't know that he was there. This was the biggest thing to happen since E.T., yet he didn't know that he was there. Didn't mention it, okay? As we wrap it up, there's another interesting thing in Matthew 26, verse 17 to 19. It says that Jesus was crucified after the Passover. In John 19:14, it says, take a look at it for yourself. You're in the book of John. Go to John chapter 19. Look what it says. It says that Jesus was killed. It was the preparation for the Passover in the 6th hour, and they took Jesus away and crucified him. So it says in John 19:14, Jesus was crucified before the Passover. But it says in Matthew 26, verses 17, that he was crucified after the Passover. This is something that I really like. Let's do real quick, and we're down to the last two scriptures. But let's do a real quick Bible jump because I want to show you this. You'll get a kick out of it. Let's look at the women who came to the tomb after Jesus' resurrection. This is good, okay? Here we're going to get some eyewitness accounts here. Go to page 31, Matthew. This is the last one, and you're pretty much done. Matthew, and we don't usually do this for those new people. We don't usually Bible hop like this, but that's what the subject is today. Matthew 28, okay? Now let me get up here so we can keep score and see who wins. Matthew chapter 28 on page 31. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. 2 women. All right. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Now let's go to Mark, the next book. Okay, and let's go to Mark chapter 16. And let's see what Mark said, because obviously this is the Bible, and everybody has got to be accurate about this. And what does it say? And when the Sabbath was past, chapter 16, verse 1, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome came. Oh, okay. We have now 3 women. Well, God just might have not, somebody told him that Salome was coming. Let's go to the book of Luke, and let's see. I know Luke was really sharp about this stuff. He was really tuned into this, so he would be able to tell us exactly who it was. And we'll go to Luke chapter 24 and verse 10, okay? It was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary, the mother of James, and the other women who came. So there was at least 5 ladies that he knew were there, okay? I mean, it is the Bible. And let's go to the book of John and see if we can wrap this up, because, John knew all about this. And the first day of the week came Mary Magdalene. Okay? Now, what have I accomplished? What I'm trying to do is get you to start to read the Bible with the single eye and not the 2 eyes, because it is loaded with contradictions if you look at it literally. The Apostle Paul said, be not a minister of the letter, be a minister of the Spirit. And finally, after the resurrection, where did the disciples meet Jesus? This is important because, this is the ascension. This is where you go up into the space. So this is the big thing. The disciples all came around the mountain for the ascension into space. Let's see where it happened. Okay? Matthew, page 32. Matthew chapter 28. Page 32 in the New Testament. Matthew chapter 28. Okay? Verse 16. And let's see where this all happened. The 11 disciples went away into Galilee. Okay, that's where this ascension took place, huh? Okay, went away into Galilee, and then Jesus took off there. Let's see what Luke says in Luke chapter 24. That's on page 87. Luke chapter 24 and verse 33, because he knew all about it. And they rose up the same hour and returned to Jerusalem. Jerusalem. You know what? Look at me. It's 100 miles from Galilee to Jerusalem. 100 miles. John doesn't even know that it happened. John doesn't even mention anything about it at all. I think if you have the Son of God ending the book and flying up through the clouds, it's worth a mention. John never even mentioned it. Never mentioned being at the Transfiguration. Never mentioned the Ascension. What's it mean? It means the Bible's wrong? Not at all. We went through 45 minutes of contradictions. There's not one contradiction in the whole thing. Everything is put in there by the masters to deceive and confuse those who approach the book with the carnal mind. Can't be read like that. Just agree a minute. Jesus Christ said, "Unto you is given to know the secrets of the kingdom, but to them that are without, all things are parables." In the ancient mysteries, in the tombs, in the ancient temples, and in the pyramids, they would put things in numbers and letters, and just to totally deceive and to turn you and to get you looking in totally opposite directions. You're not to understand things with the mind. You have to understand it with the Spirit. There's not one contradiction in here, but if you look at it literally, it's filled with them. Filled with them. But if you look at it with the Spirit, you begin to understand spiritually what this is all about. And you begin to be able then to come to grips with the reality of what God is and the reality of what life is and the reality of what the kingdom is. And so then I ask you to think of this. Is that camera still on? Oh, okay. Because I'm walking all over the place here. Okay. What I ask you to do is not go from this place with the thought that we studied Bible contradictions, but we studied that you must begin to look at the Bible in a different way. Do not look at one letter in there literally. And quickly, Psalm 78:2, God speaks in parables. Proverbs 1:6, wisdom is understanding the dark sayings of the ancients. Mark 4:34, Jesus never taught but in a parable. Galatians 4:24, the Old Testament is an allegory. Okay? All of that, saying that you have got to approach this mystically and spiritually. And if you understand the Kabbalah, if you understand the ancients from Egypt, if you understand the Chaldeans and the Babylonians and all of this, where this stuff comes from, you understand that these people wrote in spiritual terms. They did not write in literal terms. So we didn't see one contradiction in there. We simply saw those things which are there to confuse the carnal mind. And you should not be confused by any of it. Some of it we were able to bring to you. Yes, even in that, 2, 3, 5 women. There's a message in there. Do you know that if you take, I'll tell you something, you want to fool with something someday? Go get yourself a Bible dictionary, whatever you want, that describes what names mean, and go through the lineage of Jesus Christ, and there's a message for you. You know, this one begat that, begat that, begat that, begat that. Each name means something, and there's a message, a divine message contained within that, each name. Each name was put in that order to give you a divine message from the Lord. And I'll tell you something right now, you're the only people in Forked River that know that. Yeah, differently. Yeah. Well, and that's specifically that way because the message is different in each of those books. There's a secret coded message in the Bible to you that comes through pinning down the lineage. And I've got one that I've deciphered, and I'll be glad to share it with you, what the message is. That's all it is. All of those different names are not there to tell you anybody begat anybody. They're there just to say that this, in other words, let's just say, for instance, let's say Al's name meant happy, and this, say Al's name meant new, and Joan's name meant year, okay? So they said Al, beget Joan. Happy New Year. That's exactly what it's for. That's the way it was done. And they have so confused the establishment out here that these people haven't the slightest idea what this is all about. And that's exactly the way it had to be. All right, I think that, one other thing, when you go and you get your Bible sometime and you want to look at contradictions, take a look sometime at the book of Genesis. Genesis 1 to 5. Genesis 1 and 5 were written by one person. Genesis 2, 3, and 4 were written by another person. Genesis 1 and 5 know nothing about Eve, know nothing about Cain and Abel, know nothing about a Garden of Eden. Genesis 5 says, do you want to look just real quick, just something interesting? Come on, we're done. I mean, you sat this long. It's not, what are you going to get, you're not going to get aggravated. You might say, boy, he talks a lot, but, what are we going to do? Here we go. Genesis, let's just take a look at this together because it's really interesting, all right? And this is going to blow your... Now, how many of you know that Adam and Eve had Cain and Abel? And how do you know that Adam and Eve lost their fig leaves, got in a lot of trouble, running around eating apples in the garden, got kicked out of the garden, had all of these things? How do you know that God created Adam the man and Eve the woman? How many of you know that? Yes. God, yes. We got one here that knows that. Let's take a look at... Are you with me in Genesis 5? Yes. How many have a Bible with Genesis 5 in it? Okay, out there in television land, Genesis 5. Let's see what it says. This is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day that God created man in the likeness of God made he him. Male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam. And Adam lived 130 years and begat a son in his own likeness after his image and called his name Seth. And that's the end of it. What happened to Eve? What happened to Cain and Abel? What happened to the apple? What about the serpent already? What happened to getting kicked out? What about the fiery this and the fiery that? Nothing. This guy knows from nothing about that. Huh? Did you know there was a time when all humankind was male and female? And begat? That's for a whole other story, and we'll do that sometime. But there are things that are difficult to talk about. But that's a fact. Do you know that you are male and female? And these cuckoos that have been causing people grief, women, have no idea whatsoever. God, things are falling apart. You know it's a fact? But there it is, and you just saw it. Did you see that? Called their name Adam. Their name Adam. You know what that is? You know who that is? That's Christ consciousness. That's the birth of the Christ consciousness. That's the second Adam. Huh? That's the Adam that is in the higher realms. Who's the other Adam? The lower Adam is the fakakta that gets involved with this woman, and he has all of this crazy business, and they're eating apples, and serpents are crawling around. They have these two kids. One kills the other. The whole thing's a mess. That's us. That's the... Genesis 2, 3, and 4 is the creation of the carnal mind. Genesis 1 and 5 is the creation of the divine mind. Not bad, huh? What is it? Wait a minute. He just said something brilliant here, wasn't it?
That would give you the likeness of God. Instead of the old man with the beard, you have the Christ consciousness with the lower consciousness. That's your likeness of God.
Yes, sir. For sure. And that's where it got. But I mean, if you didn't look at it with yourself, you wouldn't have known that. Did you ever see that? Know that God created them male and female and called their name Adam? Well, you did tonight. Did it without Eve, fellas. This is my, let me show you something. This is my ultimate and last thing for the evening. And this is, I'm throwing this in. There is no extra charge. There is, okay? Watch this now, because some of you have heard this, we do this before, some of you have not. Adam, the center of life. Okay? Adam, center of life. Okay? You take an electron from an atom and you multiply the energy. You take a rib out of Adam and you create the population. Is that book you have in your lap saying that God multiplied life by splitting the atom? I say yes. So go to your local church across the street and tell them that you have solved the riddle of the book of Genesis, that God split the atom. Taking a rib out of Adam means exactly that. Do you see how advanced it is? The first page of the book of Genesis talks about splitting an atom. And we think that we're catching on to things.
That's right.
Is this wild? Is this wild, Albert? You sat through this. God bless you. Wherever you may be.